Well, hi guys, it's that time. It's our Bible teaching snippet of the day. Well, today I want to do part 7 of our series on penal substitutionary atonement. Did God kill Jesus? Now, before I get started, I want to make sure I say this. The reason that I'm challenging this doctrine, which by the way has only been in the church since about the 1600s, okay? Jesus didn't teach that about himself, that God, his Father, was going to beat him, hang him on a cross, and kill him and pour his wrath out on him, okay? Jesus didn't teach that. The early apostles did not teach that, okay? The men that sat under the apostles, they are called the patristic leaders or the early church. They did not teach that. We have their writings, okay? All the way up until, I believe it's 1095 to 1098, yep. There was a man that wrote Substitutionary Atonement, a paper about that, and the theory of satisfaction, that God's wrath and anger was satisfied by him pouring it out on Jesus. That was 1095 to 1098, okay, by a man by the name of Anselm's, okay. He was a Latin-speaking Roman Catholic. But it never did get any traction even until the 1600s, okay? So he wrote it around the 1100s, and it didn't even get traction until the 1600s. And what we see then is that we have leaders in the church that come on the scene who see God as a very angry deity that has to be satisfied. We see that through Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Jonathan Edwards, and they would preach an angry, wrathful God who is going to judge people and throw them in hell for all eternity. These two doctrines specifically, okay, has turned the church toward making the gospel, the good news, is that God is very angry with mankind, and he has poured his wrath and anger out on Jesus and sacrificed Jesus so he doesn't have to judge and pour his wrath out on human beings and throw them in a lake of fire to burn in hell for all eternity. Okay, so these two doctrines kind of pull together, really. We started with a faulty translation of our Bibles, okay, and so that's where the false doctrine, yes, I call it a false doctrine, a lie about eternal conscious torment in a place called hell or a lake of fire. That is a false doctrine that was put into Christianity in the 5th century by St. Jerome in the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, and now in the 1600s, we have more angry men that think that God's an angry man, or an angry God. We have an angry man in the 5th century, that would be St. Augustine, and now we have more angry leaders teaching more angry God theology. Theology means what you believe about God. So we got Calvin and Luther and Jonathan Edwards teaching an angry, wrathful God going to get even with and make mankind pay up for what they've done. Okay. So where did all this faulty doctrines begin? Well, it goes back to 382 AD when St. Jerome was commissioned by the Roman Catholic Church to come up with, actually they only commissioned him to do the 4 Gospels, to come up with a set of 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and because they had variant manuscripts, and they wanted one set of Gospels for people to read, but St. Jerome took it upon himself to do the entire Bible. So he goes to Bethlehem and he translates the Old Testament from one set of manuscripts that was written in Hebrew, and they weren't actually complete manuscripts, but he took those manuscripts and translated from Hebrew into Latin. Okay. He refused to use the Greek Septuagint as a source document. Now, what is the Greek Septuagint? This is what I used in our last teaching, where I laid out our Hebrew manuscript-based Bibles alongside the Greek Septuagint, and I showed you how vastly different Isaiah 53 is, okay? And it is completely different than what we read it in our American Bibles. The Greek Septuagint, that word means Greek, right? That's how the manuscripts are written. In 200 BC, 200 years before Jesus, 70, the word Septuagint means 70. 70 Hebrew scholars, they were also experts in the law, 70 Hebrew scholars, experts in religion, translated the Hebrew scrolls over to Greek, the new language. So we had two languages alive and well, very popular. These 70 men knew both languages. These writings of the Greek Septuagint was used for 600 years. And then St. Jerome refuses to use the Greek Septuagint as a source document. And that right there is where we started getting a faulty foundation, okay? The doctrine of hell came through St. Jerome's faulty translation because he moved the word Sheol, the place of the dead, the grave, to the word infernos, the Latin word infernos, and we got the English word hell from the Latin word infernos, and now we have the doctrine of hell that was never ever in the Bible prior to St. Jerome. And again, that didn't even become popular through St. Jerome. He just laid the foundation for it. It took hold as one of the doctrines of the church, not the only doctrine, but the doctrine of hell was put into Christianity in the 5th century by St. Augustine in the Roman Catholic Church. So the next thing that connects to that is the penal substitutionary atonement theory, which also reflects an angry God wanting to get even with mankind. But the way they can get out of being him getting even with them is we'll just throw Jesus under the bus instead and let God beat him and hang him and kill him, right? So if we did not have a faulty translation done by one man in 382 AD, and we were still reading from the Greek Septuagint, we would not have the doctrine of hell, and we would not have the doctrine of God beating and killing Jesus to get even with mankind, pouring out his wrath on his own son. So today I'm going to read a couple of things to you because I want to recover just a little bit about what I covered in part 6 of this. I'm going to read to you verse 10 and 11 out of our King James Bible, and I'm going to read it one more time in the Greek Septuagint. The Greek Orthodox Church has never taught hell or penal substitutionary atonement. They think that is heresy, and both of those are false doctrines. They have never changed their language from Greek to anything else. Their scriptures have never changed, and their theology, what they believe about God, has never changed either. Okay, it's our theology that has changed over 2,000 years because through different languages, different understandings, what we believe has changed. Okay, so I'm going back. This is not New Age. Okay, it's Old Age going all the way back to Jesus. If you want to say that something is New Age, the doctrine of hell is New Age, okay? Because it came into being in America through an American Bible, an English Bible, I should say, not American, but an English translation around 1400, okay? And then in America, it's known as, we think that's the only thing that's ever been taught, and that's just simply not true. It was not a doctrine in the church. And then, of course, penal substitutionary, I just told you, that was never a belief until 1600s, okay? So what we're believing is the New Age beliefs, something that was taught in a different age than when Jesus was around. That's what the word New Age actually means, a teaching from a different age, okay? I'm going back to what Jesus and the apostles taught. So let me read this to you real quick. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief. So right there we see that it's God bruising Jesus and putting grief on Jesus. Now let's go to verse 11. He, being God, shall see the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied. Okay, so God is going to be satisfied when he sees Jesus in his travail and his suffering. Now let's go back and let me read it to you one more time in the Greek Septuagint. And the Lord also is pleased to purge him from his stroke. And that word stroke means beating, okay, or bruising. And it pleased the Lord to purge Jesus from his beating. Okay. Verse 11. The Lord also is pleased to take away from him the travail of his soul. So what we see here is something totally opposite. God was pleased to heal Jesus and purge him from what mankind did to him, and to make him whole and set him free and take away the travail of what Jesus went through. Okay, that's what the Greek Septuagint teaches. What we teach is God is up there smiling from ear to ear because he himself is hurting his own son to get even with mankind. And that is absolutely not what was going on that cross, guys, okay? What was going on that day is love came into a hateful world, and people with hate in their heart and evil, nothing but evil in their hearts, hated Jesus because he showed us a true picture of who God is. He was the one that came to bring us peace and to teach us how to live and to show us the Father. And we totally rejected that by punishing Jesus, by beating him and hanging him on a cross and saying, you don't belong in our paradigm. You don't belong where we're at in our lives and our thinking. No, we will not accept you. And what Jesus did was pay the price of coming to be our peace, to teach us how God created us to live, okay? Jesus' mission was to show us who we were created to be. So what I want to do from here, okay, I want to show you something else that I have discovered, and this won't take but just a second, and then I'll sign off. I've been studying Hebrews chapter 10, verse 4 through 10, and this is where it quotes, and I never did understand where this quote came from, but here it says, it says here, sacrifices and offerings you have not desired, but instead you have made a body for me. And you know, I have looked and looked and looked, and I could not find a scripture that said that. You know why? Because our American Bibles don't say that. It doesn't. Our American Bibles do not say what Hebrews says about a body. But actually, in the Greek Septuagint, it actually does say exactly what this quote says. Let me read this to you. I am over in Psalms 40, 6 through 10, okay? And here's what it says in the Amplified Classic in our American Bibles. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, nor have you delight in them. You have given me the capacity to hear and obey. Okay, but let me read to you what the Greek Septuagint says. And this just blew me away when I found this. So even Hebrews lines up with the Greek Septuagint. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared to me. Whole burnt offerings and sacrifice for sin you did not require. Man, I need to read that to you one more time, because we think that God demanded sacrifices and offerings. And it tells us over and over by the prophets that God did not require sacrifices. It was man that required sacrifices. It was our broken way of trying to make a deity happy. Okay, it started in pagan religions. Okay, offerings to the fallen angels in Genesis chapter 6. Okay, and it went from them offering humans to these deities, to animals to these deities, and it carried over into pagan religions where they would offer animals, their own babies, as sacrifices, okay, their children, to their false gods. And then we picked up offering sacrifices to our God. It was all started and rooted in a false belief system. But I'm going to read it to you again. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. A whole burnt offering and sacrifice for sin you did not require. Now I'm going to keep reading. Then I said, behold, I have come in the volume of the book that is written of me. I desired to do your will, O my God, and your law in the midst of my heart. I have preached righteousness and a great congregation. I will not refrain my lips, O Lord. You know my righteousness. I have not hid your truth within my heart. I have declared your salvation. Okay. I have not hid your mercy or your truth from the great congregation or the great assembly. Okay. So what we see here, now see, we think by reading in Hebrews that God gave Jesus a body so he could have a perfect sacrifice that he could pour his wrath out on and kill him. And actually, he prepared a body for Jesus to come to bring us teachings, to instruct us in righteousness and peace, and all of to teach us truth. How many times do you remember in the Gospels Jesus saying, I have come to show you who the Father is. I've come to show you truth. I am truth. All of these things, guys. Look, I'm going to sign off. I'm going to stop right here. I would like to read to you the entire Hebrews 10, chapter 10, verse 4 through 10. Maybe I'll do that on my next teaching when I pick up, and we'll take a little bit deeper look at that God wasn't actually putting Jesus in a body to make him a sacrifice, but instead God did not want sacrifices. Jesus said, I came to put an end to sacrifices. He wanted to end the pagan deity sacrifice system and come and teach us about righteousness and what God's truth is. Okay, listen, I'm going to sign off. I pray that you have a wonderful weekend, and don't ever forget that God loves you and I love you as well. I'll see you here next week. Bye-bye.